Welcome to the Cashflow Project podcast. Are you looking to better your financial situation by increasing your cash flow? Too busy to hunt for real estate deals or don't know where to start? Then you're in the right spot. Join us as we dive in and talk about investing for cash flow using multifamily real estate.
Welcome to the Cashflow Project podcast. I'm your host, Steve Fierros with Tri-City Equity Group. Today, I'm excited. We've got an international show on today. We've got Dr. Axel Meierhoefer on the show. So Dr. Axel, he's the host of the Ideal Investor Show. He's also an Air Force veteran. He's turned into a real estate investor and a book author. He's got an incredible history, which we've just spent some talking about. I love his experience, both internationally, working in corporate, working in real estate. So very, very diverse. But he helps students now use strategies like 1031 exchanges, turnkey investing, and more in order to help develop his own real estate portfolio and help students along. So he's also owning multiple properties in different countries. In fact, right now he's recording with us all the way from Spain. So halfway, literally across the globe from where I am in Hawaii. But he's got properties in different states around the US. He spends part of his time based in both in Spain and in California. So he can definitely speak on multiple markets, definitely is not afraid to invest outside of his own backyard. And he's here to provide value and share on his story and how he can help you. Dr. Axel, welcome to the show.
Yeah, hi, Steve. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, it's an absolute pleasure. I really appreciate you taking time out of your day, your evening, to hop on with us and talk with me and the listeners and kind of share a little bit about your story, maybe how we can help them and kind of get your take maybe on the market today. But before we get started, give us a little bit of your background for those of our listeners that may not be familiar with you or your work. How'd you get started in the business? Did your family always own real estate and they just handed you the keys and said, okay, son, here you go? Or how did that work out?
No, actually not, because as you mentioned, I'm originally from Germany and the ownership rate in Germany is probably one of the lowest. I wouldn't want to say in the world, but definitely in Europe, which is partly due to the big wars and stuff like that and all those kind of historic things. So no, they didn't actually. Even my mom today is still a tenant or a renter, if you want to. Well, the way it actually started, for one, I always felt that with all these kind of movements, as long as I was an officer in the Air Force, there were always three options, just fundamentally. Either there was base housing, then the second option was renting something pretty close outside the base or trying to purchase something. And all three options have applied to me. So I kind of got the opportunity to experience it. And especially the last assignment that I was in, there was, due to circumstances, an opportunity to get basically a custom built house right outside the base, close to a golf course. And I felt that was just a new, completely different thing for me. And then obviously, like that is always the case with military, you move away and you have to ask yourself, okay, do I sell it? Do I rent it? And that became basically our first investment property without really having initially been intended that way. And a bunch of years forward, I got out of the military, went into corporate, like you said. And then in 2005, started my own business. And a few years into that, I realized, there is no military pension. There is no real 401k. There is no real retirement plan or stuff like that. And I knew that the money that I would get monthly through the military would not really long-term be enough to sustain the family. So it became obvious, okay, I need to do something else. I need to invest. And now you have to keep in mind, I mentioned started the business 2005, few years in. That was only relatively recently removed from the dot-com bust, right? And so when you started looking in where could I actually invest money to build something so that I could like in some way retire in the not too distant future, at least have the option, I felt stock market wasn't it, because so many people had lost so much money. So I started looking around, wondering, okay, what are other alternatives, and fundamentally found real estate. And keeping in mind that I got hired out of the military from a place in New Mexico, which was very modest pricing, to Santa Barbara, California, which is kind of almost the top of the heap when it comes to pricing. So even though real estate sounded and looked like a really good thing to be in, I found a whole bunch of really famous people who proved to have real estate. One I always mention is Arnold Schwarzenegger, who was super famous at the time for the Terminator movies. And very few people knew that he was one of the largest residential real estate investors in California at the time, putting his money from the movies into real estate. And he was like speaking my language, even though it was Austrian, right? But still close enough, and came to the US like I did and so forth. So I felt a little bit of like similarities there. And I thought, oh, let me see if I can do that. Just to find out it's pretty much, and even today, impossible to do that for a normal person with normal salary in the Santa Barbara area. And that ultimately got me to research, is there no way for a normal person with normal salary to invest? And I discovered turnkey investing, and we can talk about that a little more. And so becoming a business owner and then realizing that I needed to build something to get time freedom in the future got me into real estate.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I know you've got an incredible story, and we're going to touch on more parts of it, but even just you sharing your brief background, you mentioning that about, let's say, the military, and part of the challenge with that. We see that a lot here in Hawaii. That's one of the primary economic drivers here is the military. And so that's a very, very common question for a lot of the servicemen and women that come out here is, well, hey, I want to own a property in a beautiful place. And that's awesome. But hey, my next duty station is going to be somewhere completely different. Do I even want to bother trying to manage that from a distance, or should I just outright sell it? And so we have a lot of that. We experience a lot of that here from all of our servicemen and women. And so that we totally understand that. And that a lot of our listeners are probably going to resonate with that. So it sounds like you were faced with the same challenge, and it is tough. You are in a very expensive market. But Hawaii is probably one of the ones that's also right there with San Diego and with Santa Barbara, that area. I also love too. And I think this is where a lot of people have found going into real estate being something more practical. In fact, one of our partners, you mentioned, hey, you know what? The stock market's not going to be an option. And that was one of the drivers for one of my business partners currently to say, hey, you know what? I'm going to try my hand at the stock thing. And guess what? I have zero control over what the CEO of the company does. I have no control over that or what he decides to say on the news. I love Elon, but I have zero control over his mouth and how that affects my retirement, potentially my retirement portfolio. And so, okay, well, hey, we need to have more control, and you can do that with real estate. So yeah, definitely a commonality. And I love your example. I think you're the first one that I've heard mention. I did not know that about Arnold, that he was such a large real estate investor, like our owner. It makes sense, you would think, but I did not realize it at all. But the key takeaway for me there was, hey, you know what? You're going to find somebody who's aspirational. Hey, this person has obviously had success in their life. Guess what? If I follow in their footsteps, and this is a key thing, if I follow in their footsteps, I implement some of the same principles and practices, I should see success also, right? Now, obviously, you're not going to be a super buff movie star, maybe necessarily, but hey, I can follow him in real estate. He obviously found value in investing in real estate. I can do that too. And it sounds like that's something that you gravitated towards and now are helping maybe other people to see as well.
Yeah, exactly. And if you look, and anybody who is interested in that, I highly recommend to read his autobiography, because most people, especially in the US, only know him as this famous person. Even if you go all the way back to Conan the Barbarian, he was kind of already famous as a bodybuilder. But when you read the whole story, and I think he did a great job, I don't know if he wrote it really all by himself or with somebody's help, but to really describe his upbringing. And that is very, very basic, very traditional, no indication whatsoever that he of all people would become famous. And the thing that I felt was very inspirational, why I'm saying it's not just the story, it's also the dedication to a craft. If one thing is true for the guy, however you think about his views and his history and maybe some of his behaviors, but when he set his mind to something, he really, really got very dedicated, very focused. And I think bodybuilding is one of those things where you have to do that. But if you really look into anybody's career, anybody's life, anybody that you know by name, the level of dedication is oftentimes the difference maker, right? And so from that perspective, even totally unrelated to real estate, I think it has always been a pretty inspiring story.
Yeah, no, I was going to say too, I know this is going to take us off track here a bit, but I just kind of wanted to see that. And because of where you are, let's say age-wise, and how you've kind of experienced different cultures, and we were talking a little bit about this, your experience working in different cultures, different fields, you can bring a value and a different perspective that a lot of us maybe don't haven't experienced, right? So I'd be curious as to your take. Well, you're talking about Arnold's dedication, and something I'm sure that you've observed with other high achievers, right? High performers in any industry is the dedication to the craft. I'm curious now, I've got young kids and I'm sure you've worked with a lot of kind of younger professionals in your career and maybe young investors now too. Like how much of, let's say, our modern social media and how many other things that kind of take away our attention now, how it's kind of become more of a challenge. I'd say even in the last 20 years, let's say to the last 10 years for sure, but the last 15, 20 years, I think has really, there is something always trying to grab your attention. And it's, I feel like it's becoming increasingly more difficult to stay maybe focused. So you have to kind of make that conscious effort. I'm curious, I'd be curious to get your take on how much you've observed that maybe in the last 10, 15, 20 years with maybe students or with people that you've worked with. It's like, okay, I kind of have to grab you, or this guy started off okay, but then he kind of went off the rails because he just got sidetracked on something completely different.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to say about that. Over the time, at least my lifetime, I would say one of the really, really fundamental changes that I've seen, and this is, by the way, and I don't want to come across as somebody who's only just mentioning books, but there's another like really interesting book that kind of supports that argument. Is called The Fourth Turning. And it talks about archetypes of people in the context of the change of like the economic and social environment. And if you take a look at it, it basically divides these archetypes and these 4 seasons, if you want to, or what they call the fourth turning, into kind of generational steps. And so for me, coming from Germany, the first one totally makes sense. And it kind of in their way starts from the time like in the 1930s, 1940s, when the Second World War ended, all the way until a little after I was born, like the mid-60s. That kind of time frame as the time where, due to the destruction of the war, anybody who came out of it was super, super dedicated to rebuild. And it's in a similar way to what we just touched on with Arnold and really building your body. In a way, people that came out of the war, not just in Germany, but all over other than maybe the US. But even there, it was a sense of rebuilding the economy from all the young people being in the military, coming back home, and the meter maids were no longer necessarily doing that and going back into normal wives tending the family kind of things. So that first turning, so to speak, was a really, we need to get this all back. We need to be dedicated. And what they taught the kids that they made, quote unquote, that was that kind of dedication, that focus, that ability to overcome adversity, that bootstrap stuff, to struggle, to recognize that you can do a lot with a little. And then the next 25-year period was, okay, those kids basically started reaping some of the fruit of that buildup, but still needed to apply themselves quite a bit. And that was baby boomers and whatever the next generation right after the baby boomers was, up until, I would say, probably late 80s, up to mid 90s, depending on how you define it. And then the next generation after that, I think you could say millennials are part of that, was, okay, more and more of a protective kind of approach started to take hold. And now in the fourth phase, so to speak, which started probably around 2005, 2005 and up to now, is when you really look, and to answer your question, what do I see, is if you look at parenting, I personally, if I had to describe it, is overprotectiveness, right? Thinks of everything is available. We basically get participation awards. We're driving the kids in an SUV for less than a mile to school and make sure that they make it into the building and stuff like that. What does that create? In my opinion, it runs the risk that we create people who have no connection anymore to these struggles of their grandparents, let's put it that way, or grandparents. And so the fourth turning is basically getting to say, okay, well, after you get to that point, we need to have some sort of a reset. Now, nobody is suggesting that reset needs to and should be a war. But what we can all see, I believe, if you pay a little bit of attention, is that the powers are shifting. And to go to this little bit bigger picture perspective, what I've been seeing at the same time, but with about 40-year shift, if you think about 1948 to 1988, 1988, 1990s was when China was starting to come out of their Mao system and adopting. Deng Xiaoping said, okay, we do economic zones and stuff, and we try the Western style economics. And they did their thing. And what we're seeing now is we can call them the enemy, or we can call them being impressed of what they have been building in the last 40 years. Either way, they are kind of like the new game in town. And we are at the point where we have exhausted this building phase that we had in the first generation. So for me, seeing all these changes, I'm actually really curious. I feel we're living in an unbelievable time in a sense, partially because I've always been, with my flying background, very interested in technology. And even you mentioned Elon in a certain context, but when I'm looking at what the NVIDIA guys are saying, what the OpenAI guys are saying, what Elon is saying, what several other people are saying, is this transition to the age of abundance brings up so many new things, not just AI, that it will be very interesting to see. And I believe for your listeners, for the audience, if you are the parent of kids that have gotten to the point where they actually can comprehend what you're trying to convey, and for yourself, I can only highly recommend to really pay attention of what this transition actually means. And one more thing for maybe another book, and then I'll stop with the books until we get to my own.
No.
Tony Seba wrote a book, an amazing thing I really want to recommend, and I don't get anything for mentioning these books, but it's called Stellar, and it's the attempt to think, how can this transition into the age of abundance? And when you ask yourself, what are we in right now? He calls that the age of extraction. Think about what are we doing and how is our economy running all over the world is basically because we are extracting a resource and then we're applying it to something. And because we are applying it to something, we get a result. And the age of abundance would be to say we build something one time and it never needs to be replaced, at least not in the normal sense where you need to, like, if you want to drive a car, you need to put in gas. Like, so not in that sense. So he says, for example, just to give you a little tidbit, if you build a massive solar system, nowadays technology, that thing is going to run 50 years, 60 years, and has maybe 20% degradation, right? And by the time the 50 years are over, you will have so many robots that no human will never have to touch it to replace a panel, right? So in that sense, it's kind of almost self-sustaining, which means energy would be self-sustaining and abundant, and you will build your solar systems. Like you said in Hawaii, I don't think you ever have those days, but if you go to like Alaska or like northern Germany, you would look at where is the week in the year where there's no wind and almost no sunshine, and you build your solar system to still supply the economy in that week. Which, why is it the age of abundance? Because for any other week in the whole year, you would have so much surplus, it would be ridiculous. And so that makes no sense to charge anybody for electricity anymore. And so those are some of the thoughts that he put in place. And for me, I find it really interesting to imagine what would happen if nobody needed to work anymore. What would happen if basically everything you want in life is available without the rich get it and the not so rich don't get it kind of approach. So there's a lot there. And like I said, we could talk for hours about that topic, but I think those are some of the things that I would recommend. And I'm very, very grateful that my parents were in that first builders age group that got me some of the principles. Come all the way back to your question to say, you need to ask yourself, who am I and what do I want to stand for? And when you look at all that AI and all that social media stuff and so forth, I'm finding that people are consuming without an answer to that question.
Yeah, that's good. And yeah, we are in a very unique time in history, and I still see it as opportunity everywhere. And so, but it is challenging as in how to position yourself the best in a way that's, because some part of we're having to draw on what our knowledge is of of history. At the same time, too, we don't completely know what the future looks like. And so we need to bring some old world tools, some practical application, some grit and grind, and to having some dedication and some focus to not be distracted and say, okay, well, hey, I'm going to become a master of this craft that should still serve me well, regardless of what kind of changes that we're going to be experiencing moving forward. And I think about it frequently because, like I said, I do have young kids. And so I think about the world that they're walking into. I know I'm also preparing them, though, and I don't really see them as having competition because in our modern age now, it's like, wow, if you do just apply some of the dedication to the craft, well, you really stand out. And so I do think we are stepping into a very unique time in history where there's incredible potential. And so you just have to be able to kind of, all right, well, I'm going to grab a hold of this. We're going to stay on top of this, not get distracted, keep your eyes on the prize, so to speak, and make the most of these opportunities. But I want to kind of bring us back a little bit more to kind of real estate and back to, although I love talking about the books, please do not apologize for the recommendation of the books. I'm taking notes here. So I'm definitely, I've heard of some of them, and other ones I'm like, okay, yeah, no, I've got to add this to the reading list. But yeah, I want to talk a little bit about kind of your exposure and your experience with the real estate, kind of what you're working on now and where you see we might be headed. Obviously, you're kind of mentoring up people as well. You own property internationally, so I love that. I find a lot of people that have a hard time buying at a distance, buying outside of their own backyard. A lot of people, well, if I can't see it, I can't touch it. I just can't. And so it's like, well, hey, if the best opportunity is not in your backyard, then look for somewhere where you're going to be treated best. Look for somewhere where your money makes the most sense to invest in. So what kind of strategies are you employing currently for your real estate portfolio, or have you experienced? And kind of what are you guiding and directing people on to take advantage of now?
Yeah, so I mentioned briefly earlier that the methodology that I basically discovered and then really dug into and still to this day use for the most part for the foundation with our clients and for myself is basically for the US market, working with turnkey providers, especially when you live in relatively expensive areas like we mentioned, San Diego or Santa Barbara. But the same is true if you're in Boston or New York or Miami or any of the big cities, because the real thing, you and I and everybody who is listening and interested in real estate has probably always heard that the main thing is location, 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 right? And in a way that is true, but I personally like to change that word into performance, performance, performance. Because performance is kind of like the real result. The location itself doesn't do anything for you. What you're really looking for is the performance of the property in the right location. And if you look at it that way, like one little thing that we use to even get started to say, is it worth looking at a property, is something like the 1% rule, meaning like you want to invest in a property where the monthly rent is close to 1% of the purchase price. So a $250,000 property should have somewhere between $2,300 and $2,500 in rent. And this is obviously, again, somewhat related to location, but it has to do with the size of the property, the area the property is in, but also the market overall, especially when you think about right now, the average home price in the US is in the 400,000, right around 400,000. So when you think about that, you would have to say how many people, when you take average income into consideration, could really afford $4,000 rent. And if they could, wouldn't they be better off to own the property themselves? Which then, if the answer to that is yes, or almost always yes, you know that your property investment needs to be below that to also get to an affordable rent, so people will be actually interested to renting your property. It's a little different. I know you're specializing more in multifamily, where the unit price is a little bit different. The whole calculation is different, but we are in the like single family, duplex, triplex, fourplex area. Now, one way is to go to a different approach from long-term rental to either medium-term or mid-term rental, as it's called, or short-term rental. That mitigates, but then you have other issues to cope with, occupancy rates and stuff like that. I always find it comical when people tell me, yeah, I can get 3 times the rent if I make it a vacation home. And I said, okay, what do you do the other 7 months when nobody's there? So those are all the different considerations when it comes to why did we get into turnkey. But the real fundamental thing is to say, who is the typical member in our program? And most of the people are what I call Henrys. And those, for anybody listening, I'm looking for more Henrys. This is high earning, not rich yet. That's a Henry. And so you have a job, you're making good income, you're living like I used to do in Santa Barbara or some expensive area, and you say, I want to invest in real estate that is well performing. And I want to have full control. I don't want to be in a syndicate or in a fund or anything like that. I want to really own the property and make all the decisions that are relevant for the property. Well, then you need to look for performance. And the way to do this, in my opinion, is you find a turnkey provider who does 3 things. And all these individual three things you can find otherwise. But if they are provided by separate entities, you as the owner will always have to fight with them who takes responsibility. The beauty of a turnkey provider is they find the ugly duckling, hopefully in a good area that you can confirm, and turn it into a good swan, meaning they renovate it to top standard building standards. So that is probably one of the better, if not the best property on that street or in that neighborhood. Then second thing they do, like anybody else in real estate, they put it on the market. And because they renovated it, they know what the value should be, but they also know that they're only going to find a buyer or investor if it is at a rate where it appraises. So people oftentimes say, I don't buy from turnkey providers because they make it too expensive. Well, the maximum expensive they can make it is so that it appraises. Because the lender that we're using for our 80-20 or 75-25 deal is requiring an appraisal. So if they go crazy with the price, they're never going to sell. Right. Now, you could argue that people keep telling me that they find properties below market rate. And I say, well, I'm not disputing that it's possible. But if you're not a market expert because you're 2,000 miles away, or in your case, 4,000 miles away, Steve, then it's hard to actually know what is the proper thing. But the appraisers typically do. So that's basically the marketing and sales part of the turnkey provider. And then the third part is the property management. And that has two huge benefits, at least, if not more. Number one is they know the property because they know it already when it was an ugly duckling. In our case, we always get them to also commit to at least 1 year to come up for any kind of repair costs that are related to the renovation. Because I think it is logical to say, if you renovate it and it didn't even hold together for 1 year, you better come up to fix it. Now, if you say, okay, I buy it from a flipper or I buy it from whoever, you always have the dispute of who is really responsible, who really installed it, blah, blah, blah. With a turnkey provider, you made a solid contract. If they believe in their product, they should be willing to actually give you more or less a warranty for a year. Now, the other thing is they also know that if they are, as a turnkey provider, selling to investors, that the investor has an expectation of performance. So which company wants to constantly go out because the tenants called that this is leaking and this broke and this is squeaking and stuff like that? So I still believe that they have every incentive to do a little bit better quality renovation because they don't want their property management arm of the business constantly complaining to the renovation arm of the business that their quality isn't there. And therefore, you're robbing Peter to pay Paul in a sense. So those are the three core things that I believe why it's actually a good idea. I'm not disputing that it can be sometimes a little bit more expensive, but ultimately, I recommend to our clients to build clusters of 4, 5, 6 properties with the same organization. And then when you do it with our help, then it's not just you with your 1 and then 2 and then 3, but you're joining a community, we call it the tribe, that has probably 20 or 30 properties with that same provider already. So it's a little bit of a different power dynamic when I call them and say, hey, Steve has the second property with you and he's constantly complaining about lack of communication. Do you really want to get rid of us or what's going on? And they typically have a little bit more of an urgency to fix it than if you with your 1 or 2 properties call them.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah. Yeah. And this is the beauty of real estate in general. Like there is 101 different ways to make it work. And you mentioned multiple strategies, even just in you talking about that. And so, and it's absolutely true. And it's a matter of finding the best fit for you as an individual investor, your resources available to you, where you might like to own property. I know for you, like you own property internationally as well. And so a lot of that can factor into it. Maybe it's an area that you'd like to go visit, that you are buying a turnkey or something in. I do like the kind of when the companies can go vertical, you have more control over different facets of the business, the property management, the builder, and whoever's actually securing the property. So yeah, there is definitely more elements of control versus, okay, the left hand's not talking to the right. And now we've got challenges that are arising from that. So yeah, there's definitely value, no doubt, into that investing strategy. So yeah, very good. Well, this is the part of our show, Dr. Axel, we transition to something, what we call our fire round, just a little bit more rapid fire Q&A. Is that something you're up for?
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
All right. First question, what is the best book that you recommend? For most of us in the real estate space, it's Rich Dad, Poor Dad. It's the real estate purple Bible there. But for you, what is your best book recommendations? You've given us a bunch, so far. So
Yeah,
I
I gave you
definitely
a few already.
appreciate
Number
that.
one, I should say, my own book. It's called
Yeah.
Like the Wealth Grower and describes the process that we apply. But if we put that aside, one that I've always really loved is called The Wealthy Gardener by John Soforic.
And hopefully all of our listeners have been kind of adding to their Audible list or their Amazon list, The Wealthy Gardener. So very good. All right. Next question. What would you consider your superpower to be?
I would say helping people understand that they should become the creator of their own future.
I love that. One of the things that we do a lot of networking here locally, and I just have all over the country. And so one of the things that I'll always tell people is like, hey, first advice. Okay, well, what can I do to get started? I always tell them, get rid of your TV. Get rid of your TV. And not because they may be zoning out, sitting in front of the TV for hours and hours, because we can do that with our phones too. But I always tell them, well, look, as long as you're watching somebody else's, you're watching a show, you're into Game of Thrones or any of these other number of like different shows. It's like you're so wrapped up in somebody else's vision that's come to life on the screen. If you're so consumed with that, you'll never have bandwidth. You'll never have the mental bandwidth to go and create the vision of that life for yourself. And so, hey, why watch somebody else's vision come to life on the screen? Watch your own. Go create your own. And so, yeah, no, I love that. I love that. All right. The next question. If you could go back in time, go visit your 20-year-old self. You got a time machine. If you go back and you're 20 years old, what advice would you have for you?
I think invest. Well, I would say probably find out what investing means. And then by any means possible, try to invest as much as you can afford every month.
How incredible. It's like, oh, hindsight's 2020. It's like, oh, the listeners have the benefit of hearing that now. And I would definitely do the same. I would tell myself the same. It's like, but you still have to have the faith. You have to have the boldness to go and do that. So,
well, yeah, but if I may say so, if you think about, you said my 20-year-old self, if I'm looking now, that would mean basically a 40-year time horizon. Even if I go with, like, it didn't exist at the time, but just for a second, imagine I would be one of the crazy people who said, okay, I buy NVIDIA at IPO, Amazon at IPO, Microsoft at IPO, and then I just see what happens. And I keep doing dollar cost averaging, and I'm by no means anywhere near an advocate for stock market investing. But that would be a reasonable thing, because with a little bit of money you make initially, you can buy a stock or two every month or something like that, depending on, and when you buy at IPO, you can probably get 10 or 20 every month. The point is that time horizon, that's the one thing. Like, we're working with our clients to reach the time freedom point, meaning like the point where you have the freedom no longer to have to exchange time for money. You have money working for you, so you can do whatever you want with your time. Well, the sooner you start with something, even if half of it fails or 60% of it fails or something like that, but you start at 20, then you can fail a few times. And by the time most people get in the prime of their work, you will already have reached your time freedom.
Yep. This is the power of compound interest, and yep. And just continuing. And this also too, right? The consistency, you mentioned it earlier, like just the consistent investing, and then allowing that to compound over that past, let's say 20, 30, 40 years. Incredible.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Yeah. And I have to say, Steve, I hope you don't mind me saying this. It's not really so much the compounding. In my relatively long life, I would say the biggest, most important thing is learning from failure. The earlier you can fail and learn from it, and then do it different the next time and the next time. Right? When I really started getting out of the military and started, I was 45. So I robbed myself of 25 years of failures and experiences, right? And then the time window gets much, much shorter. I'm a living example that is still possible. But I also know it would have been much, much easier if I had started 25 years earlier.
No, absolutely. Yeah. The typically the most successful people that I've interviewed and that I've met over the years, it's always, hey, first to failure. It's like, okay, we're going to fail often. We're going to fail quickly, and we're going to dissect the failures. Okay, I'm not doing that again. I'm doing more of this. Okay, great. But that only happens if you're willing to step out and you're willing to take
absolutely. And early on in life, the failures are cheaper because you just didn't have so much to put in.
Yes, it does get more challenging the older you get, the more responsibilities that you get.
Yeah.
You got a family and all that kind of stuff. No doubt, your risk profile, risk tolerance, all of that definitely changes compared to when you're 20 years old. So, no, very good. Well, and for the busy working professionals, our last question: somebody who's trying to work towards financial freedom, what advice would you have for them?
I would say the most important thing, and I have only really discovered that not more than 10 years ago, is ask yourself, take a quiet place, quiet moment, and ask yourself, what are you really passionate about to an extent where you would say, I think I could be interested in this for the rest of my life. But in my case, it's technology, interest in engineering solutions and stuff like that. And nowadays, I would also include like software and AI stuff and so forth. But it started with my flying stuff and has always been with me. But it can be something completely different. The reason I'm bringing this as the one thing to ask yourself and come up with an answer and challenge that answer over and over is, when you discover that, then you can go out next step and say, which organizations or companies do exactly that? For two reasons. Number one, if it's really something that you're passionate about for the rest of your life, you won't mind researching it and tracking along and listening to it and reading to it and watch YouTube about it and blah, blah, blah. So you will become the preeminent expert other than the people running the business. And you can then see which ones in that particular area of the world and that particular business are doing the best job and dedicate your money to it. So if you just randomly invest in stuff or in indexes or in real estate because somebody says it needs to be real estate, the amount of dedication and energy that you're willing to put into it is never going to be anywhere near the same than something you're really passionate about. And that passion, by the way, just if people ask themselves, what are the benefits? When you are passionate about, you will know enough about it to know. You mentioned Elon, for example. If I look currently, and I've already been an investor since 2020 at Tesla, I couldn't care less what all the media are saying about the ups and downs, because I have become such an expert in what they're doing that I can much better identify if they are on a good track, on a challenging track, or not so good track, because I'm looking inside in what they do because I'm passionate about it. Wall Street and the pundits and the media and YouTube and all the other people couldn't care less what they say, as long as I see that organization is executing on its vision. And anybody who has ever started a business, I'm sure you would say that, Steve. I can say this for the two businesses I started. Nothing is really running in 90-day or quarterly increments. Nothing. So the complete craziness that the media is trying to educate us that every 90 days we need to see a fundamental and positive change in a company is just complete crap. But they can get away with it because most people not really passionately dedicated to any particular organization. If you are one of those, then you will be the one who, when other people say, I wish I had invested in fill in the blanks. I mentioned some of those organizations already. You will say, well, I did because I was passionate about it. I understood where they're going and I trusted them as long as they execute. But there will be so many millionaires have already and will in the future be from Tesla or from NVIDIA or from OpenAI or from many of these other companies. And all of them, you will find, are people who invested early. Why did they invest early? Because they were passionate about what the company wants to accomplish.
And this kind of comes back to your last point about what we're talking about. Hey, investing often, failing forward, failing often, right? Because again, you're not going to find out what you're passionate about unless you're trying things. Exactly. Right? You got to educate yourself. You get the exposure. And so like that leads perfectly into that and what we're talking about. And full disclosure, I'm Tesla owner, love the cars, love the technology, stock owner, all that kind of good stuff. None of this financial advice, guys, but I also agree with Dr. Axel. So if you know what they're doing on the technology front, they're miles ahead of anybody else. There's no competition. So, but anyways, well, Dr. Axel, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. How can our audience get in touch with you if they want to reach out and connect with you? Hey, pick your brain about your book or talk to you about your coaching and your guidance on turnkey investing, or if they want to come out and visit you in Santa Barbara or Spain or wherever you are else in the world, how can they reach out? How can they learn more about you?
Yeah, so one thing is you can just put my name into Google and it pops the first, 10, 15 pages with different things. But the other way and the easier way is to go to idealwealthgrower.com. And then somewhere right at the homepage is a little button that says, I think, Discovery Call or Book a Call or something like that. That gets you right onto my calendar. You book a time and we have a conversation just like Steve and I have right now. And then we see if I can help you. I always love to. And if we just have a great conversation, then we do that.
Awesome. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. I really appreciate you taking time out of your day to come on and share with me and share with our listeners I definitely look forward to connecting with you in the future and wherever that may be. Like I said, that may be in Europe, that may be in, in Spain. But yeah, I would love to circle back with you and kind of check in and see what you've got going on at that time. But I really appreciate you taking time out of your day, and we'll hope you enjoy the rest of yours.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. And like paella and sangria is waiting for you.
Sounds good. All right. Aloha. Thanks so much. All right. What a great conversation with with Dr. Alex Meierhoefer with Ideal Invest. Great guy. Obviously, very incredible background, being in the Air Force, the German Air Force, the U.S. Air Force, the private sector, and then obviously doing stuff in the real estate sector as well. So such a varied background and history. But you got to talk to people who don't look like you, who don't talk, you have a different life experience than you. You can really gain and glean so much from their personal experience as well. And so that's one of the things that we looked and we hope to provide for you guys on the show. So great conversation with him. We'll make sure that we link some of the his site and maybe some of the book recommendations that he was talking about there in the show notes. But if you want to connect with him, make sure you're reaching out. Guys, if you're interested in investing with us, you can go to tricityequity.com. You can learn more about the deals that we've done, the upcoming opportunities. We'd love to have a conversation with you, see if it's something we can help you out with and helping build your investment portfolio. To connect with us here locally, you can connect with us with our Facebook group, Honolulu Multifamily and more. You can find us on meetup.com, Bigger Pockets, a variety of different platforms. We've also got our annual conference coming up next month. I can't believe it. The Hawaii Millionaires Mindset Conference coming up June 19th through the 21st. So it's going to be 3 days. We're just going to talk business. We're going to talk real estate. It really is the best real estate and business conference anywhere in the state of Hawaii. So if you're local, make plans to be there. You can go to millionairemindsetblueprint.com. You can get your tickets now. And guys, if you find value in the podcast, please share it. Please leave us a 5-star review. You know what? If you didn't like it, you hated it, you can leave us a 1-star review too, but just make sure that you comment and let us know why and how we can make improvements. But that's going to be it for me today, guys. We'll see you on the next episode. Go out, take some action, go out, fail forward, get out there, try some things, and we will see you on the next one. Aloha.